Hey everyone, this is the EmPower plant, and this is the EmPower Hour, which is a 1 hour every week where we meet and celebrate an empowered woman from our community to inspire us and teach us. And today we have the wonderful Anita Kuhnley, Dr. Anita Kuhnley. She says we can call her Dr. Anita or Anita. And she is an author. She is a highly educated PhD in counselor education. And she's going to tell us about her book, which is called The Mr. Rogers Effect, which is very popular and inspiring people everywhere and reminding people like me of my childhood watching Mr. Rogers, which I enjoyed thoroughly. I was a child of the 80s. So when I came home from school, we would watch. I'm one of 6 kids too, so we have a lot of cable. We didn't have that good cable. We had like 3 or 4 stations, and one of them was PBS. So we got home from school, we could watch Sesame Street, and Mr. Rogers came on right after it. And I have the most wonderful memories of that and of him. So I'm so excited to meet you. We have an awesome panel here today. We've got Denisha Hill from our office.
Hello.
Hey, Denise. We've got Kia Thomas.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, girl.
Hey.
And we've got Carrie Roan, who's had a heck of a week out fighting for her clients, but she made time for us today. Thanks for coming, CR.
Yay.
And finally, we have Anita. So Anita, please tell us about yourself. We want to get to know you.
Well, thank you for that very gracious introduction, Betsy. I really appreciate that. It's great to be here with all of you guys and get to meet you virtually. And I'm so excited to hear that you grew up watching Mr. Rogers, you grew up with The Neighborhood. There's some research that shows that children who grew up watching The Neighborhood tend to have longer attention spans and higher levels of creativity than those that were exposed to some of the other types of programming. So that's exciting. And exciting for children today, since many of those episodes are still out there and they can be accessed. And then, of course, Mr. Rogers' descendant, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, was based on his puppet, the Daniel Tiger puppet, and now it's its own animated program.
I feel like we could spend this entire hour talking about, what I remember and what stuck with me from Mr. Rogers, because like I said, it's just that feeling of nostalgia when I think of him. And then when I had small children myself, they watched Daniel Tiger. And I remember thinking, I remember that character when we would go off and then we get on the train. I mean, I say we, but they would have the train come out and then you go to the make-believe world and all the puppets were there. I wonder though, like with the current programming for kids, would they ever be satisfied with that, or have they become used to a lot of action and a lot of like amazing animation, and or would they still connect with a program like that? What do you think?
That's such a good question, because I mean, when it comes to Mr. Rogers, he definitely intentionally took a slower pace. He was mentored by Dr. Margaret McFarland, and she was a developmental psychologist at the University of Pittsburgh. She worked with some key players like Eric Erickson and Benjamin Spock, who were some of the big names in developmental psych. And they hit it off so well when he took a counseling class there that they started a friendship and a mentoring relationship that lasted for the rest of her life until she died in her 80s. And so she helped him try to figure out how to make his programming therapeutic and developmentally appropriate. So I like to call him America's children's television therapist, because everything he did was designed to be therapeutic. So it wasn't always as fast paced as some of the other programming, but if children can settle into it, a lot of times they can connect with different aspects. Like there was a little boy who was watching, and he was about 3 years old, and he told his mom, I think he knows my name. And it was interesting. He just felt so seen and cared for by Mr. Rogers that just watching him on television, he felt like Mr. Rogers knew him. One of the things that comes up a lot when I talk with people about the book is that they'll often say, we need Mr. Rogers now more than ever. And so I think there's something in our society that leads people to long for the type of programming that he offered that is characteristically different from some of the things that we see on television today.
The word that comes to my mind is comforting.
Comforting.
I
Yeah.
think that's the reason I have these good memories, is because it was a comforting show to watch. And not only that, but he tackled big topics, didn't he, Anita? Like
Mhm.
he tackled the race relation issue. He tried to teach children about that. I think the episode was, they had what was it, the black law enforcement officer who was on the show.
Mhm.
And then they had him, and they sat together and they put their feet together in an out, like a wading pool.
Yeah.
And it was to show children, like, this is my friend, and this is,
Mhm.
and I don't remember what year that was or what time in our history that precisely it was, but so meaningful for that time period.
I love that. I love that episode because, when he invited Officer Clemens to be a reoccurring star on his program to play that role, week after week, and he wanted children to see, an African American role model that was cast in this positive light, and he wanted also to take a stand against racism. So when there was programming where people were like putting chemicals into pools and pouring bleach on African Americans trying to get them out of pools, Mr. Rogers clearly took a stand and said, I want Officer Clemens to come swimming in my pool. Now, given it was low budget television and they had a kid's little blue plastic pool, but that didn't change the meaning. He said, why don't you come soak your feet? And Officer Clemens said, oh, I don't have a towel. And he said, that's okay, you can use mine. And then, we see him sort of drying Officer Clemens' feet. And for Mr. Rogers, he was also a person of faith. And so I think that also represented something significant about the sort of servant heart and the love for his neighbors that he brought to his programming, and the clear message that everyone was his neighbor,
Mhm.
regardless of skin color.
So tell us about how you came to realize that Mr. Rogers would be a great topic for a book to tie into what children are experiencing today.
Well, it happened. So I work at one of the large nonprofit universities, and I train counselors. And I was teaching an intensive class where we have a large group of students come in and work on developing clinical skills. And we were talking about helping people process painful emotions, and specifically anger. And I showed them this video clip before I'd ever even thought of the book or anything like that, of Mr. Rogers addressing Senator Pastore. And have you guys heard of that one or seen that
I've
one?
seen
I
that.
don't remember
clip.
it.
I know the clip you're talking about.
Okay.
I saw it on somebody's Facebook feed and I clicked on it, and I'm so glad I did because it was great. But please tell us all about it.
Yes, I'm so glad you saw it. And it was just this phenomenal interaction where, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was on the chopping block. They were about to cut funding for his programming and reroute it to other budgetary areas. And he was there to advocate for PBS and for his program. And Senator Pastore was a self-proclaimed pretty tough guy, self-proclaimed curmudgeon. And Mr. Rogers came, he had his paperwork and he was ready to read his statement. And, Senator Pastore made it clear he didn't really want people reading any more statements. And so Mr. Rogers said, well, I have prepared the statement, but I won't read it. I'll just talk about it. And I trust that you'll do what you said and that you will read it, because that's one of the first important lessons children learn in families is trust. And of course, Senator Pastore was irritated and said, would it make you happy if you read it? And Mr. Rogers is like, no, that's okay. I just like to talk about it if you don't, if that's okay with you. And so right away, Senator Pastore kind of started to soften, kind of mellow. And you could see Mr. Rogers kind of looking past his words and maintaining his composure, not getting defensive back, which would have been very easy to do given how he was, being treated. And then by the end of their interaction, Senator Pastore, he had just transformed this guy from adversary to ally. And he was saying, well, when does this program come on? I would like to watch this program. How can I access it? And the last thing Mr. Rogers shared with him before he said that, I think was really powerful, and it ties into what we're talking about related to children and school violence.
Hey, is it unlocked, Joe?
And that was this idea.
Go like this to the driver's door and then push the button.
And there's Joe,
Okay.
our own
Hey,
Mr.
Joe.
Rogers.
No. Sorry, Dr.
Our
Anita, we
Mr.
run by the
Rogers.
seat of our pants.
Oh, you're good. But he noticed that Senator Pastore was experiencing some frustration. I think he didn't say that overtly, but he asked him permission. He said, "May I share with you the words of a song?" And it came from a little boy, and a little boy asked me, "Mr. Rogers, what do you do with that mad that you feel inside?" And that's what he called it. What do you do with the mad that you feel? When you feel so mad, you could bite. The whole wide world feels oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. And then towards the end of the song, one of the last lines is, "It's good to be able to stop when you planned a thing that's wrong and do something else instead and think this song." And he stressed how wonderful it was for children to have that good feeling of self-control and to be able to stop.
Can you get it?
And adults, not just children, but I mean, you were just saying that and I was like, man, I need to remember that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that transcends age. That's not just for kids. That's something we all could use a refresher on from time to
Right.
time.
Very true. My husband's a psychiatrist, and he first started working with adults, and then he went back and got trained to work with kids. And he often says that he had to get trained to work with kids to learn how to work with adults. And now he says he works with children from age 3 to 103.
So it was this interaction between the Senator Pastore and Mr. Rogers that sparked your inspiration to write this book somewhat?
Yeah, so I showed this to my students in the classroom, and what happened was that then I asked them, what was it like for you guys to see this video of Mr. Rogers interacting with Senator Pastore and helping him process, and sort of walking him through this process, and also kind of addressing his feelings of anger indirectly. And one of my students, she said, "Well, I work in the inner city schools, and my kids, they don't have a Mr. Rogers, and they wind up turning to violence and hurting each other because they don't know what to do with their anger." And that just really stuck with me. It would just weigh on my heart, and I kept, just thinking about and praying about these kids and thinking, everybody needs to have somebody. Everybody needs to have a Mr. Rogers like figure in their neighborhood, whether that's their school counselor or a teacher or a coach or a neighbor or just someone that is like that safe place, as that person that cares for them and helps them learn how to organize their feelings and express them in ways that don't hurt them or others. And so as I was thinking about that and praying about that, the thought kept coming that, we need to, just because Mr. Rogers died nearly 20 years ago, doesn't mean all those messages and all that good that he brought into the world has to die with him. So then I started working on a qualitative research project with some colleagues to say, how can we analyze his work and look at how did he do this? And so we identified like the top 7 themes. There was a longer list, but we came to consensus on the top 7. And then I just kept researching those themes and looking at unpacking them through the Mr. Rogers effect. And so we were really on a mission to help people know how to maintain that presence in every neighborhood, in every school system, so that there can be a school counselor, a teacher, a coach, someone that is able to help children make sense of their emotions, know that their anger is mentionable and manageable, and deal with it in ways that doesn't hurt them or hurt other people.
Wow, that's amazing. And, I actually wrote that down on my pad, be the Mr. Rogers, because that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So let's go to our panel. I've been talking the whole time. So Carrie, since you might have to dip out, why don't you go first? What you got?
Well, I haven't thought about Mr. Rogers in a really long time. And, you said something earlier that I think is important to talk about, and it's whether or not kids would find him interesting now or as compelling as some television now. But what I found with my kids growing up is that I was in charge of that. Right. So most kids will watch the screen if you let them, and they'll see whatever's on it and they'll be interested in it because it's so different. If it's the Wiggles or Yo-Yo Ma, not Yo-Yo Ma, what's the one I'm trying to think of? Yo-Yo Ma's
Yo Gabba Gabba.
Yeah, Yo Gabba Gabba.
Gabba Gabba.
Yo-Yo
Oh.
Mom's the cellist that was actually on Mr. Rogers. So that's why he's like at the forefront of my mind. But so, I would love to like reverse the hands of time for my kids and like make sure that they watched all the Mr. Rogers episodes. We control so much, or we have been able to control so much of what they consume through television. But now through social media, it's really, really hard to not be able to control that. But I wish I could go back and make them watch all those. I mean, there's so many treasured ones. Like I remember when they talked about his dog dying. That was the first time I had ever heard anybody talk about death. And then there was like, I think he had a kid in a wheelchair. And then they wound up having like a reunion like later on, and it was like big in the news. And that was the first time I had ever seen a child with any disabilities. Like there were so many firsts for me from watching that show. I just think it's so valuable. So that is a really long-winded way of asking you, what is the type of value that your book is bringing to both adults and children that we would benefit from reading?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned both the situation with when he was able to bring up uncomfortable topics, like he brought up the topic of death, and he invited Jeffrey Erlinger, the young man in the wheelchair, to be on his show and share with people, what he was experiencing. So I thought that those were really neat moments that you mentioned. So, sorry that the chat came up.
Yeah, I just saw it too. Somebody, I think it looks like that's either Dana or I don't know. It's somebody from Basic. Oh, it's Greg. My favorite moment is when Jeff Erlinger, the boy in the wheelchair, reunited with Mr. Rogers when he was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame. Yeah, that was the moment I was thinking about, where they had their get together.
Okay, y'all talking about the dog dying and now the reunion. I'm gonna start crying here in just a minute. Please.
Don't mess up flashing.
Thanks a lot, Carrie. But yeah, no, that was a great question, Carrie, that you asked. Like, what can we as adults learn from your book?
Yeah, so thanks for asking about that. So with the book, the Mr. Rogers Effect, the original subtitle was The 7 Things Every Difference Maker Needs to Know. And then the publishers kind of tweaked it a little bit and wanted to be the 7 secrets of bringing out the best in yourself and others from America's beloved neighbor. But what we did is it looked at his experiences through a psychological lens and understanding, we know, wow, the things he did, right? He died 20 years ago and he's still being displayed on the big screen with Tom Hanks starring Mr. Rogers. He's credited with saving public television, earning $20 million in minutes, able to convert people from adversaries to allies, able to connect with children through this screen long before Zoom was a mainstay. But how? Like, what was his recipe or formula, and how can we, learn from what he did to be able to have a similar impact, or have an impact in our own way, but use some of the tools that he left behind. And so the book walks through these 7 different strategies, and like one of the first ones is this idea of listening with more than your ears, and breaks down these psychological strategies into easy to implement steps that we can take that will help us have a greater impact in our own neighborhood, so to speak. And our neighborhood could mean, our office, or our actual neighborhood, or our family situation, or whoever it is that we're, interacting with on a regular basis.
So, and just real quick to follow up, Betsy, I didn't mean to jump on you, but like when you say have a greater impact, like what are some of the examples? Like what can we do to have a better impact in our neighborhood or in our office or our own family lives?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the, I like to ask people, of these 7 secrets, which one did you resonate with the most? And a lot of times people have said it's been the secret of empathy. So just to use that one as an example, since people seem to really resonate with that, is one of the things that we unpack there is the difference between empathy and sympathy, because so often we're socialized to just show sympathy. So if you say, as we went through a tough time, like our family pet died and, or my grandmother died, or, I had some kind of loss, a friend or colleague might say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then you might say, oh, thank you, period, end of sentence, maybe move on to something else, right? And so with sympathy, sometimes that can lead to disconnection and shut down a conversation. But with empathy, well, let's say your colleague says, oh, I know you were so close with your grandmother and she played such a special role in your life and even helped raise you. That must be so tough to lose someone so special. Help me understand how you've been coping with this loss. Then that sort of opens up the door for more connection and discussion. And so in counseling, sometimes people, when they're first getting trained to become counselors, when a client cries in session, they may get really uncomfortable and they may have been socialized to say, oh, don't cry, it's okay. But it's more helpful. And one of the things that Mr. Rogers said, and he rarely ever stopped production, but he actually stopped production one time because someone told a puppet not to cry. And he said, I want you ever to tell a puppet, a child, or any person not to cry. It's better to say, it's okay to cry. I'm here to be with you. Because all it means if we tell a person not to cry is that we tend to be uncomfortable with their expression of emotion. And so in this empathy chapter, we break down the subtle distinctions between sympathy and empathy. And there's kind of a chart with different phrasing and how you can make subtle changes in your phrasing these small changes that can have a huge impact in how you connect with other people.
That sounds really interesting. And I mean, I consider myself an empathetic person, especially what we do in personal injury. But I think I have room for improvement just based on what I just heard from you. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, I appreciate you putting it in those terms because I can see how that would be something that could come up a lot with people sharing about their injuries. And, then we're socialized to respond with sympathy. So it can be interesting to think about, okay, am I responding with sympathy or empathy? And, empathy definitely will open up that discussion a bit more. But I do think that's one that people in the helping professions tend to resonate with because it allows for just greater connection and dialogue. So that one that can be really helpful. Another one, just one more example while we're on the topic is showing gratitude. It sounds like such a cliche that we've been always taught to count our blessings. However, the research literature shows us that when people express gratitude, it can be associated and correlated with higher levels of resilience, decreases in depression levels, increases in social connection, increases in happiness, and increased acts of helpfulness and generosity, as well as increased satisfaction for their relationship partners. So our sense of gratitude can even help our partners to be more satisfied with life. So it's one of those things that just has so many positive aspects associated with it. And Mr. Rogers had this technique he used, and I'd love to try it with you guys if you're comfortable with it. It's just this 10-second sort of activity. Would that be okay?
I'm game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So anytime he would speak, whether it was at the award ceremony that Greg referred to, where he was, receiving an award on television, or whether he was speaking at a graduation ceremony, he had this question that he always liked to ask people. And I'll just adapt it for our current setting. You guys are helping people navigate and recover and deal with the aftermath of personal injury. You have training in law, you're trying to empower women through this EmPower Hour. You guys are making a difference. You have, you're out there reaching out to people, connecting with people and helping people every day. But chances are you didn't get here alone. Chances are there was somebody on your journey of becoming who you are today that cared for you and sought to nurture the potential inside of you and the best that lies within you. And they might be nearby. They may even be in the room with you. They may be far away, or they may even be in heaven. But I'd like to invite you to take a moment, to take 10 seconds to just think about a person who loved you into being who you are today. And I'll keep the time.
Ooh. This is intimate.
Really?
Thank
Carrie,
you.
Carrie, are you thinking about me?
Yeah, actually, the first person that popped into my head was Dana, because Dana's professionally encouraged me. Probably, you know, I've known Dana for like 15 years, maybe, and maybe 12 years or something. And she's really encouraged me from a professional standpoint. But then Anita said at the end, who's like loved you into existence. I was like, well, I don't know that Dana like loved me that much. Like, I shifted over to, you know, my parents, who always encouraged me to just never stop and never quit. You know, don't look at myself as a girl who has disadvantages. Just be who you are. So that's, after Dana, I thought about my parents. Sorry, mom and dad.
I may have done it wrong, but I also thought about more people than just one. You know, I know that was the assignment, but I thought about my parents, of course, but then at different times in my life, I've been lucky enough to have mentors for whatever I was going through at that point. And I don't know how or why. Maybe it's just the universe that attracts the people that we need to us. So we have that. But my mind was going, you know, through my life as it's been up till now, and people who have been there for me through every stage and mentored me to your point. So wow. So what are we meant to gain from this, other than just,
Well, thank you guys for sharing, you know, speaking to mind for you. And you know, how, in terms of what you're supposed to gain, he would typically follow this question up with this idea that, think about how happy those individuals would be to know that they played a role in your success and you getting to where you are today. And you know, there's also the idea that there will be people that think of you in this moment when they're asked this question and are grateful
like
for.
Carrie thought of me.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Zanisha, is Rhonda yours?
Yes, and I would say my kids, especially the one I lost, because I would say for her, you know, to be gone, am I just gonna ball up in a ball, or am I gonna go out and do something and be something? And then I will also say Dana, because she kind of pushes me to do more, and because I kind of feel like, well, I'm not qualified, or I don't know. And then she was like, no, you have way more potential than you give yourself credit for. So she kind of pushed me to go that little extra mile. But if I had to say who loved me there, it would be my kids and my mom, because I had to keep going. And because I always say, if for my kids to look at me and to see what I'm doing now, just like for my oldest to tell me that he was proud of me, just because I text him to tell him that Dana had messaged me to ask me to be her personal assistant. And I was like, well, honey, I had already filled that spot, so you don't have to worry about that. And just for him to say that he was proud of me, it just makes you feel good. It makes you feel like, you know, that it's going to be okay. You know, you have those little hiccups, but I'm here for a reason. And so I would say a lot of people kind of pushed me and ushered me and loved me through. So yeah.
I love the fact that you include your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yep.
so Dr. Anita, is one of the points of this to reflect on this and then express our gratitude to those people. We feel moved to do that.
I think that's a wonderful outcome of the situation, to express gratitude, because that just strengthens those connections and allows them to experience the feedback of knowing that they made a difference, and the encouragement that brings to them of knowing, you know, the value that they add. And, you know, in some cases, as Denisha mentioned, you know, we may be thankful for a person who's in heaven or who's not here, and but we still hold space for that gratitude in our heart. And you know, that love that we shared is something that death cannot take away. And so we have that comfort in that. But then also one of the things that Mr. Rogers often encouraged was to remember those people that have loved the good that lies within you and nurture that. And he would often be speaking to people in television or people graduating from high school or college and say, the world needs more of that part of you, the part of you that was loved into being, that was nurtured and encouraged, that those people brought out of you, and to try to bring that best part of yourself to the world, because that's really what's needed. And so I think that is one way. The subtitle of the book is bringing out the 7 secrets to bring out the best in yourself and others from America's beloved neighbor. And I think that's one of the strategies that he used. Is something we can do relatively briefly, but it helps us get connected and centered and remember our purpose. And it also helps us to connect with those people that loved us into being who we are. So I think it's multifaceted. It incorporates several of the secrets. So there's gratitude, because we experience gratitude. There's security, which is associated with feeling connected. There is a sense of listening, because we're kind of tuning in and listening to sort of the still small voice inside of us and our own inner dialogue as we're thinking about who really loved us into being. And then there is this idea of pausing to reflect. He also wanted to think about how can we encourage people to participate in reflection more, and how can we look at making goodness attractive. And so it sort of takes a lot of different pieces of the puzzle of the Mr. Rogers effect, the different strategies, and puts them together in this exercise. And of course, the more often we do this, the stronger it gets. And you can even build an association with it. If it's snapping your fingers or rubbing your cheek or whatever the case might be, the more you visualize and think about these things and have a physical gesture, eventually that power of association gets strengthened, and feeling that gratitude and connection and appreciation for life gets associated with that gesture. And eventually, at the snap of fingers, you can tap into that feeling where you feel equipped to bring that best part of yourself to whatever you're facing.
Whew, Mr. Rogers was a pioneer of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Right? Like I'm sitting here feeling already better. I mean, in our exercise, I thought of people that I haven't thought of in years and years and years, and it felt good to remember them.
Yeah.
Kia, so we haven't heard from you yet. What's on your mind?
I think I was thinking on the emotional intelligence side as well. One, even thinking about the humble, hungry, smart type, the 3 virtues. And my biggest thing that I think I'm pulling from this is like why I became a coach. So I was looking at one portion where it said, a safe haven and a secure base. I think that's what Mr. Rogers provided. And a lot of times when I'm going to practice, you're talking to, our athletes, and you really figure out that they're wanting to be here so much because they're looking for that safe haven. They're looking for that base. And I think through the emotional intelligence, because you become more self-aware. Like I'm sitting here listening to this now, and I see why, you do the things you do. And kind of like what Carrie said, I think I'm already empathetic, but a lot of these things are going to help me to continue to improve, that self-awareness part. And I'm talking about coaching because coaching is so pivotal, even in your professional life, because you need mentorship. Even if you are an athlete. So I think I say all of that to say this: how can we continue to coach up and encourage when we're in these different realms as a mentor, or even being that mentee and providing it back, or in that coaching realm, so that we can continue to provide our kids, athletes, and even in the, again, professional workplace, because emotional intelligence is necessary. It goes back to allowing us to actually look at that one theme of listening for understanding and not necessarily listening to reply. So how can we keep this reoccurring theme going so that we can continue to be impactful in the different, positions that we take on?
Great question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and applying it to coaching. And yeah, I do think that's a good question about emotional intelligence and how we keep that going. And I have a neighbor, a real estate agent, who's a life coach, and he said he asked permission to share the book with his life coaching group, and recommended that they read it because he said he thought it should be required reading for life coaches because of the relevance. So I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things that Mr. Rogers believed was that if we could help children to become more emotionally intelligent, or as he put it, to remember that feelings are mentionable and manageable, he believed we could make the world a safer place for the next generation. Because when people do experience those painful emotions like anger, frustration, when they learn to kind of increase that frustration tolerance, and as the lyrics to his song say, learn to stop when they plan something that's wrong and do something else instead, and think this song, then they're choosing a better response that's going to have better ramifications for themselves, and then for the people around them, and the community within which they live. And so one of the, this again can use several of the different secrets in unison, but I think secret 2, which unpacks this concept of validating feelings and remembering that feelings are mentionable and manageable. I think sometimes people are hesitant to validate another person's feelings and concerned that it might intensify them. But a lot of times, once people are validated and they feel heard and they feel understood and have voice to their feelings, that can help them sort of feel more calm and more at peace. And so I think one of the things is learning to have self-empathy, tune into what we're feeling, give ourselves permission to feel those feelings, and do what Mr. Rogers said, which he learned from his mentor, Dr. McFarland. She taught him that everything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable is manageable. And then he shortened that to feelings are mentionable and manageable. And I think, when we're working with children, or even, when I was working as a substance abuse counselor at a teen challenge, I remember I was working with a father and son, and, when I had been working with the son for a while, and we'd been working on feelings, and whenever he would get stuck and didn't know a feeling word, because it's, how are you feeling on your journey of recovery? And he might say, well, I'm feeling good. Well, tell me more about, what that means. And, oh, well, it's fine. And I'd say, here's a feeling wheel for you, and then he would say, okay, well, I feel encouraged, or, I feel nervous, or then he would be able to come up with a more specific word. Well, then his dad was in the session, and I asked his dad, what was it like to hear your son open up? And he said, oh, it felt good. I said, is there a feeling word under that? And he's like, his son popped out of the seat, grabbed a worksheet, and said, here, Dad, here's a feeling wheel for you. His dad was like, gee,
Feeling
wheel.
Can you get a feeling wheel for the office? I don't know what it is, but it sounds great. So Dana just sent us a chat. She says, emotional intelligence is innate, but can also be learned. It is essential for developing the skill of discernment. And that's one of my favorite things about emotional intelligence is you can, to Kia's point, by becoming self-aware, you can increase your own EQ. And so that's a great point from Dana. Wish you were here, Dana. I'm in your office.
She said no feeling wheels in the office.
You
Sorry.
look great in there.
Oh, thanks. I think I'm gonna take over. It's
I'm like, where is she? She looks awesome.
Well, there's your photo. Wait, over there. There's your photo. So, but I really, I want to move into this other thing because we've been chatting and I feel like we got to get to this. So the whole concept of Mr. Rogers. Okay, so he passed away, what, 20 years ago? So he wasn't around to experience what we're seeing in terms of the challenges to our kids, like the school violence.
Mhm.
Right? What do you think Mr. Rogers would say if he knew what we were dealing with right now between Sandy Hook and Uvalde and all the ones in between? What advice do you think Mr. Rogers would have for us as parents and as children?
Well, one of the things that Mr. Rogers used to always say anytime there was a tragedy, and he heard this from his mother, and it's what she told him when he was a child, but she told him, anytime that you see scary things in the news, look for the helpers, because there'll always be people that are helping.
Mhm.
And look for the helpers. And he also believed that anybody who did anything to help a child was considered a hero. And so I think that he would be very thankful and encourage those that are trying to create safety in the school systems, and encouraging children to be able to talk about their feelings and have a safe space to make them mentionable and manageable, so that it can be a way to learn how to express angry feelings in a way that doesn't hurt other people or themselves. So I think, a lot of school counselors focus on things like social emotional learning, and having groups in school, and even, some other countries, like when we look at what's going on overseas, they actually have the word, I forget what language it comes from, but it's the word Klausentag, which means class time, where they have an hour of empathy a week. They have an empathy class, just like they have math and science and reading in the curriculum. They're teaching children empathy, and they have them sit around in a circle and share stories and struggles, and then they collaborate. Almost like in mental health, we would call it a treatment team. And I'm sure there's probably a similar legal thing where you get a team of attorneys or professionals together, and kind of collaborate, and how can we, help each other on this particular case. But that's what they would do in school. And then if no one had a particular problem that they wanted to share and get input from the team, then they would focus on having this sort of warm time together where they would just share and enjoy each other's company. But I think Mr. Rogers would encourage us to create an atmosphere where empathy is encouraged, where emotional intelligence development is encouraged, where we're being willing to listen with more than our ears, which involves being prepared to ask uncomfortable questions and listen to uncomfortable answers. As parents want to know what's going on with their children, and teachers and counselors want to know if there's some bullying, if there's sexual abuse going on. So, creating an atmosphere where a person's able to talk about uncomfortable things and share, and being willing to listen. So I think it starts with listening with more than your ears, validating emotions, you're making feelings mentionable and manageable, creating that space for reflection, where we're reflecting on what's happening, learning from experiences. I think that would be maybe a starting point. I think those are some of the things that he might encourage.
Yeah, well, we sure need him right now.
Mm.
Dana, do you have any questions for Dr. Anita?
I don't have the best service, but I've enjoyed what I've seen and heard so far. But I think anything that encourages empathy and encourages people to see the world from something other than their own unique perspective, and realize that their behavior affects other people in the world, is a good thing. And I love the idea of an empathy hour. I think that's fantastic. Just put yourself in the position of somebody else for a minute.
Okay, so Dana, are we going to have empathy hour?
No, not at our firm. But I think it's a good idea for other people. No, of course we can. We can have it right after do empathy hour at 2:00 on Friday.
Okay, so we'll
Plan it, bet. We got this.
happy hour first, then empathy hour.
Right.
I think that's the order. I think the order of that is essential, that it be done in that sequence.
Well, you are an innovator, Dana, so thank you. Thank you for that leadership. So Carrie, what do you think? I know you're a parent like me, and you probably are horrified by, the things that we've seen in the news related to children and our children being in school. When the Sandy Hook thing happened, I think my daughter was in kindergarten, and I remember dropping her off the next day, just feeling the fear myself, and not having anywhere for that fear to go, and not knowing what was going to happen next. next, and that feeling of helplessness. So what are your thoughts on how Mr. Rogers would help us right now with those feelings as parents?
I mean, I think it goes to kind of, well, you mean how to help us cope with our feelings?
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question. I was thinking more along the lines of how would he teach children to be more empathetic or be more understanding. I know kids' brains, I think that's the last part of a kid's brain to develop, is the part that at least, so I have a teenage boy, he's 17, and I have done a little bit of research on why he can be such a jerk. And my research shows that when the brain develops, the last part of the brain for a teenage boy to develop is that which expresses empathy. So Betsy, I'm totally not answering your question because I don't really know the answer to it. I think that's a good question. Like, what would Mr. Rogers do to teach kids how to cope with it? But I think the other side of it is, what would he encourage our society to do to help prevent these things from happening, you know?
Well, I have the fear, and so I always have to make it about me, right? So I want to know what Mr. Rogers would say to me. But yeah, I mean,
Like the anxiety, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, how do you cope with any type of anxiety? That's, I mean, Anita, like, not only about anxiety about school shootings, but I mean, just anxiety in general. You know, there's so much going on in the world right now. Like, there's so many reasons to be anxious. It gets really easy. So what would Mr. Rogers tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think Carrie and Betsy are both right. There are many things that can trigger our anxiety. Just, turning on the news, seeing things that are happening, and even stressors in our own lives. And it's easy to experience anxiety, and whatever we tend to spend our time thinking about and meditating on, and it tends to get magnified and get larger and can take up more of our mental space. So I think Mr. Rogers would want to encourage us first to, and I think would be proud of you for mentioning that, being willing to say, yeah, it's easy to get anxious and to feel fearful, and to acknowledge those feelings, and then to ask the question. Like, I think he would encourage you to do exactly what you're doing, right? To name the feeling, to mention it, and then think about, okay, now how do I want to manage it? Ideally, what do I want to do, with this anxiety? And so one of the things that he taught, like when he met with Jeffrey Erlinger, the young man in the wheelchair, and he asked him, like, do you ever feel blue? What kinds of things do you do? And then he shared that, when he was a kid, he would sometimes play with puppets when he felt sad or when he felt alone. And then as an adult, he was a pianist. He studied in Florida at Rollins College, and he was a music major, as was his wife, and he played piano, and he wrote all the songs for the program. He wrote the scripts and the songs, and he said he would pound out his angry feelings on the piano, but that was a way he could express his anger and get it out without hurting himself, without hurting anyone else. And so I think that for his anxiety, he would, he tended toward creative expression, right? Writing a song about it, right? Playing a song about it, using puppets to express it. And I think it would be interesting, to see what kinds of things now there's certain things that we know from the research literature, right? And what works in terms of how the brain works, like when we do things like meditation, our brain, as Carrie was saying, the brain develops from the bottom to the top. So the prefrontal cortex, which is what psychiatrist and neuroscientist Dr. Amen calls the boss in your brain, or the cop in your rearview mirror, that helps keep you on task and helps you drive safely and follow the rules and things like that, is also the area of the brain that's associated with empathy. So it is, last to develop, and it's been said that the brain's not fully developed till the age of 25. But when we are in that relaxed, sort of peaceful, regulated state that we talked about from that 10-second transformation activity, it's easier for us to think with that front part of our brain, and to think about our long-term goals, and what we want to accomplish, and to kind of regulate that anxiety. It's challenging for us to be anxious and relaxed at the same time. So when we do deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, some of those things can help us shift gears. There's also, of course, different medications or supplements that can help as well. But I'm curious, Betsy and Carrie, what do you guys, and Denisha or Kia or Dana, what do you guys do when you feel anxious? What do you do with that anxiety?
I've
So
learned to try to focus on something, and then I remember how I felt before, and that I made it through. So I kind of talk myself through it, like, it's gonna be okay. You've been here before. You'll get through it.
Denisha, you give great pep talks.
I try.
You do. I tell myself, okay, you're anxious. You're having. I try to break it down. Okay, I got fear about something in the future. That's what anxiety is, right? But what if it all works out? What if it all works out?
Right.
You know, that's what I tell myself, and that gets me out of my own head and kind of points me toward a future where it all works out. And I don't know if that's scientific, but that's what I do.
Yeah, it's in CBT, there's something they call killing the ants. The ANT is an acronym for automatic negative thought. And so, when we have automatic negative thoughts like awfulizing, right? We're saying, oh, everything's awful, or catastrophizing, nothing's going to work out. This is going to go terribly wrong. Those are considered ants, or automatic negative thoughts. And sort of feeding them to your internal anteater and saying, like, is this thought absolutely true? Like, do I know that this is absolutely true? That, nothing's going to work out well? Probably not. I mean, there's very few absolutes in life, right? So, okay, if I don't have evidence for that, then we can start to deconstruct the thought. And Dr. Amen's seen on scans, on neuroimaging, the difference that it can make in the brain when people do that. So it's very effective.
God, I stumbled onto something. Right.
Awesome.
All right, Kia, what do you do when you feel anxiety? How do you cope?
Prayer. I think that's my biggest thing. I know a lot of times I walk around here with a straight face until everybody sees me smile. That is the normal Kia. But I try to stay very cool under pressure, and I put myself, if there's a crucial conflict, I try to put myself in that person's shoes. I try to also make sure that although it may not have been me that caused any of the issues, I have to respect their feelings. So normally, anytime I have a conversation with anyone and it's a crucial conflict, as I like to call it, or a crucial conversation, hard conversations, I always tell the person, I respect your feelings. And you walk through it. But I think prayer is the best thing, because I'm a perfectionist. So one little thing, and being a creative, I think a lot of people don't see that. Us as creatives are very on the cusp of being perfectionist. So if something is off, we're looking for our Gorilla Glue. You may not see it, but we see it. And we're trying to keep that straight face, because I can't show you that I see something, because if you see it, then I just broke myself for the day. And then I do have an issue where I will stay on something because I have to fix it. So that's when I know I have to go into that prayer mode, like, Lord, let me focus. Lord, let me get through this. And it pretty much works out, just like Dana just said, every situation can be painful, but you tend to survive it, so I think that's how I get through it. That's my long-winded way of saying I pray.
Beautiful.
Denisha had her hand up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Carrie.
Oh, I was going to say Denisha had her, I think I saw her raise her hand, I think.
Oh,
Oh,
Denise, what's up?
yeah, I wanted to make sure I asked, because he taught us about neighborhood, and basically how the neighborhood was basically family. So how would you feel, how do you think he would feel now, seeing how we went from the neighborhood being our family and it takes a village to, that's not the way it is now. Like some neighbors probably don't even know their neighbors. So how do you think he would feel seeing the neighborhood that he taught us about and then seeing the neighborhood that we're living in now?
Yeah, that's a good question, Denisha. I have seen people wearing t-shirts that say, Mr. Rogers did not adequately prepare me for the
For
people.
my neighborhood, right?
Uh, and so I can get a sense of what you mean by that. And, you know,
Mhm.
it was definitely, you know, an interesting television neighborhood that he had where
Mhm.
Mr. McFeely, his speedy delivery man, who was named after his grandpa, you know, would come in and talk with him and sit down with him and watch a video, and
Mhm.
they would talk about the topic of divorce, you know, and Mr.
Mhm.
McFeely would quickly leave in
Mhm.
that episode, and then Mr. Rogers came back to the family room and sort of reflected and said, you know, Mr. McFeely got a little uncomfortable. He seemed to leave
Mhm.
really fast when I started talking. We started talking about divorce. You know, he didn't seem comfortable with that, and
Mhm.
some people aren't comfortable with that.
Mhm.
You know, and so he just, you know, it was sort of brilliant. And I think one of you guys said he was a master of emotional intelligence. But, you know, yeah, you're right. You know, my UPS guy does not come over to have long chats and
Mhm.
watch videos, right?
Right.
It's not always you know, like what we saw on television in every neighborhood. And so
Mhm.
but, you know, one of the things that Mr. Rogers did is he had such a unifying presence, you know, when you uh, like, there's some YouTube videos on different episodes and you can kind of see comments where people will say, like I read some comments. One guy said, you know, I don't believe in religion, but if there's a heaven, Mr. Rogers is there.
Mhm.
Um, or, you know, I think, you know, I'm not a political person, but if Mr. Rogers was running for president, I would have voted, you know, and so, and you see people from just all, you know, Mr. Rogers is a Presbyterian minister, but people from all different faiths and walks of life really appreciated what he had to offer in terms of creating a neighborly society where we care for our neighbors. And so, you know, I think he would encourage us to take, you know, what you shared earlier, Denisha, the sense of connection to your kids and thinking about, you know, how proud of you they are and your mom and those people that have loved you into being and whoever that is, right, for each one of us,
Mhm.
to our interactions with our neighbors and seek to, you know, be that presence in our own neighborhood. Um, and, you know, I think of this story. Have you guys heard that story about the young boy who was walking along the seashore and he was throwing in the was it the starfish into the water?
Mm-mm.
And
I haven't.
okay, so elderly gentleman comes up and says, like, what are you doing? There's thousands of those that have washed up. It can't make a difference to be doing that. And he tossed one in the water and said, well, it made a difference for that one. And so even if it seems like sort of this grassroots, like one person at a time effort to make a difference and to bring the Mr. Rogers effect into our neighborhoods, you are making a difference. You know, I work in clinical mental health and my husband works in psychiatry, and we both worked with people that have, you know, attempted to die by suicide, and people that have contemplated suicide or have said, you know, I just prayed that one person would just smile at me and that if God wanted me to live, he would send, you know, and this person smiled at me. So I decided not to do that, you know, and so it's amazing that the small things can really make such a big difference.
Well, that is our Empower Hour today, but I think that's just a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Anita, for being on our show and coming and teaching us and making us think. And that's what this is all about. So we appreciate you, and we encourage everybody to be the Mr. Rogers and check out Anita's book, The Mr. Rogers Effect.
Where can we find it? I wrote it down that I want to get it, but is it on Amazon?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. Yes, it's on Amazon, bakerbooks.com, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold, whatever neighborhood bookstore you have is able to get it and order it. But Definitely, it's on Amazon. It's also on Audible if you like podcast audiobooks. You can always.
I do. I love Audible.
Yeah, me too. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much
Anita.
for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, and thank you to all our viewers, and we will see y'all next week with another empowered woman.